hit record as well. How's everybody doing today, Mike and Steve?
Great, thanks.
Good.
Delighted to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. I'm excited. Okay, we see some participants rolling on in, so that's great. We are just waiting another moment or so to allow a few more people come in, and we will get things officially kicked off. How you doing, Mr. Mike Lampa?
I am doing well, Ms. Kalia Garrido. How are you?
Very good, thank you. It's a beautiful summer morning here in Colorado. And I know, Steve, you're living in the future. How was your day, I should say?
It was sunny outside.
That's it. That's it. You have a good amount of sun in the summer, right?
We do. We do.
Good. Yeah.
2 or 3 days. That's the British summer.
Well, I grew up in Boston, and so we've got there's a high degree of gray cloudiness that we experience, especially in the winter over there. So then I moved to Colorado, and I'm just dazzled by the sun all the time. It's beautiful. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So, yep, we have people coming on in. So we will go ahead and get things kicked off. I will welcome everybody officially. Thank you so much for joining us for our session today. My name is Kalia Garrido, and I head up marketing and events here at Great Data Minds. If you don't already know us, Great Data Minds is a collective of passionate data activists, and we are on a mission to modernize the world of data. So we do this in one of two ways. The first is that we have our services arm, which is at greatdatamindsinnovationlabs.com. And this is where we do our strategic planning, our education, and the deployment of critical data projects. Over here on the greatdataminds.com side of the house, we have our community, and we create content, and we host great events just like the one that you are here to listen to today. So a little bit of housekeeping as we get kicked off. This is a webinar, so of course your cameras and microphones are off, but we always want to hear from you. And so I know Mike has already kicked off the chat. We welcome everybody to add their color commentary there, as well as any questions that you may have. And we'll save a little bit of time towards the end of the session for a more formal Q&A if you do have some questions for Mike or Steve after the conversation. And this conversation today is going to be great fun. We are excited to hear how our very own Steve Neat, the Alation executive, has truly experienced the practical benefits of an otherwise routine data catalog. So a little bit more about Steve's background. Steve is a software industry executive and sales veteran with over 30 years of experience helping global enterprises maximize the business value of their IT investments and data assets. And to spar with him verbally, we have our own Mike Lampa, who is our Chief Analytics Officer here at Great Data Minds. Mike is a true transformation agent working with enterprises to modernize their analytics programs from the ground up. And so that's what we have for you today. We're excited. I'll stop my yapping and turn the floor over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Kalia. So I'm looking forward to Ready to Rumble since we're going to be sparring, Steve. How are you today, sir?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Great, great. So I'm really excited about this topic. When we had our prep session, yeah. So I'm just going to kind of jump right into it. You know, when we're thinking around data culture and data literacy, I mean, are these soft skills really that critical to establishing a well founded data and analytics portfolio, Steve?
Well, it's really interesting. I think there's a lot of discussion about data culture, becoming organizations being data driven. And I think there's a lot of evidence to back up that they're not only just nice things to have, they're business imperatives. There's evidence out there that if you can make faster, better decisions on trusted data, that helps you build out that data culture and your business performance improves. Not only are you making faster decisions, they're better decisions, but it has a real impact on the performance of the business. So it's no longer a soft, nice thing to have. It's a really critical and important business imperative.
Yeah, and so how do we cultivate the literacy part of it? Because even though I opened up saying soft skills, data literacy does have some real technique and education backing it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think what is a data culture that's supported. I think that's a good definition to start with. What does that really mean? And it means that decisions made in any organization are based upon data. It's no longer the loudest voice in the room that makes those decisions, but there's from the most senior people in the organization to people out there in the coalface. Data literacy is an important component of that because people need to feel comfortable that one, they have access to the data that they need to make those decisions. Two, they understand the context of what that data might mean. And three, they understand where to get it and where it comes from. So culture and data literacy are all wrapped up, in my view, and are essential to help drive drive a data-driven organization and to actually realize those benefits.
Yeah, there is quite a bit of research out there that's been published by the likes of McKinsey, Gartner, the Eckerson Group, where they're saying that the percentage of actual adoption of analytic products that they're enabled through data products is running in the low 20s, which says to me there's a lot of obsolete or non-value added work that's being done. How do we address that gap to get better levels of adoption of those analytic products were being built?
Well, I think, the organizations that I talk to, the executives in those organizations, they all want the nice, shiny, exciting things like modern AI, advanced analytics, dashboards and reporting. They all want those things because they believe they will help the performance of the business. The challenge, of course, is many of the organizations are still relatively immature in terms of having data that they can trust to build those analytics and that AI on top of. So I think sometimes those first generation of projects fail or fall foul because they're using data that isn't trustworthy or reliable. So I think it's a combination. You can only get the results you desire and get a full advantage of those analytical capabilities if you genuinely have access to trustworthy, reliable, and easy accessible data.
And I've seen too that the analytic stakeholders, the business people that really understand their data, if the published data sources are deemed untrustworthy by them, they're like water. They're going to seek the path of least resistance and go after their own vehicles and paths to get that data. And that can create a problem. While they might be getting some immediate gratification, to me, there's this insidious set of problems bubbling underneath the surface. And I'm curious, how do we start to wrap our arms around that and acknowledge the fact that our published sources aren't trustworthy?
Well, I think we've gone from a situation in enterprises 10, 15 years ago where they didn't have a lot of data to a position where we've got too much and trying to figure out what data is either important or what the level of quantity is. We've got too much data. And so for most organizations, they're trying to see the wood for the trees and without certain capabilities, without the ability to understand what is reliable and trustworthy, people are going to rely upon information that is perhaps out of date or the quality's not there or hasn't been approved. It's data that they can't trust. And those decisions will be bad decisions, incorrect decisions. So I think we've seen that shift from too little to too much. Now you need some technology, I think, to help see the wood for the trees.
And that kind of reinforces your earlier comment you said around the savvy business person that really knows how to make decisions. They kind of balk at relying on data to inform their decisions. The highest paid person in the organization that really knows their business, I know how to make my decision. And by the way, all this data, these other guys are saying it's not trustworthy. We got to figure out a way to overcome that, right?
Yeah, I think I think organizations now, I think there is sufficient evidence to say the organizations that are using trustworthy data are outperforming and competing better than organizations that still rely upon gut feel. Just look at the emergence of many data-driven companies and how they're outperforming the more traditional organizations, the modern retailers, the Airbnbs of this world, the Ubers of this world. What is their asset? Well, it's really data and how they process that data. And so there's a modern trend towards companies that are based purely on data. They have the advantage, of course, is that they don't have tens of years of legacy to deal with. And that is the challenge of many big companies. That's why many do have a big challenge and are in a bit of a mess, because they've invested in a variety of applications, ERP systems, CRM systems, e-commerce systems, that were really never designed to utilize the byproduct of the data. So there's data all over the place. So those companies, I think, have an extra challenge, which is to get their arms around huge stacks of historical data and figure out which is the most important, which are the critical data elements that they have in their organization. What's actually being used by the business? Sometimes that's not really very visible. Who's using that information? Sometimes that's not being visible. I was talking to one organization the other day, and they were going through a lengthy exercise, manual, I hasten to add, to try and understand by consultation what data is the most important data to their business. And then a subsequent exercise, again, a fairly manual exercise, to try and identify who the subject matter experts were, who should be the data stewards, who are the people who can make decisions in the organization, who are close enough to the business to really understand what it means and what the value is of that data to the business. So, these projects, some of them fall into disrepute because it's a year's worth of effort to go through those manual exercises because of the volume, because of the complexity. So I think that's the challenge that many organizations have in their desire to move towards being data driven is it's a big problem. It's complicated. There are data sets all over the place. It's a hard thing to tackle manually.
It is. And I love your observation around the critical data elements. Our organization really subscribes to lean principles. And it's always about where's the biggest value that I can deliver in the shortest amount of time. And I've seen so many governance projects or even data warehouse projects where we go off and we're going to cast a net around it all, right? And we're going to bring it all in, and then they will come. Well, to your point earlier, that's years and years of sunk cost, and the value is not happening, right? And it triggers a point for me too, Steve, is when a lot of organizations are coming to the realization that migrating to the cloud is a very valuable exercise because I can get to scale, right? But what should I migrate when I'm moving to the cloud? What's important? How do we start to discern what I should be migrating and what's important?
Yeah, I think actually that's one of the key use cases of a data catalog in my view is, sometimes people think, well, we'll move it all to the cloud and then we'll catalog it. Well, for me, that's the wrong way round. First of all, catalog what you have, take stock of what's there. And with products like Alation enables you to see what data is actually being used. So that helps people decide, well, maybe I don't need to move everything. because that's going to be really expensive from a storage perspective and take a lot more time. So why don't you just focus on critical data elements, the most popular data sets, identify those and move those across first. That's where you can get the fastest return on your investment. And actually, there'll be a lot of data that you've accumulated that you'll find out is just not being used. So maybe leave it where it is or put it in a low cost storage environment if you need to archive it in some fashion. So a catalog is not just a place to go find where your metadata is. A catalog can really help you make some really important and expensive decisions. So how do you know what to migrate to the cloud? How do you know what to invest a lot of time and energy into data quality if you don't know what you have? So that ability to ingest the data and create an inventory of the information that you have then can really help you with some important transformational decisions and cost-effective decisions in your business. It's not just a repository to go find things for the data scientist or the data analyst. It can really help you in other ways.
I'm picking up a hint, Steve, that governance needs to be woven into this whole discussion around what's important, what's critical, what should migrate. What level of governance needs to go along with the journey to migrate the proper data assets?
Well, it depends what sort of industry you're in. If you're a regulated financial services industry, then you might need a more profound level of governance to satisfy those regulations. But for most companies, we subscribe to a much lighter touch of governance. Just govern what you need. Actually, governance includes defining who the owner should be. And as I described earlier, that can be a lengthy manual process, or that can be automated to some extent in identifying, well, who are my top users? Who are the people who actually use this data? Probably they're the best people to become a data steward or a subject matter expert or the person responsible for governing that data. So a lighter touch or whatever level is appropriate for your business. Clearly, you want to be able to understand your data, you want to be able to classify it correctly, and you want to apply the right policies that are appropriate to that data. But that doesn't apply, one size certainly doesn't fit all of your data, one size doesn't fit every organization. So finding the right level that satisfies the needs of your business and any regulations that you need to comply with.
Well, governance is not a project. It's another ongoing journey.
It's another ongoing, yeah, you never stop cataloging your data. You never stop governing your data. And that's really interesting because I talk to a lot of people who think this is a 6-month project and we're done and dusted. No, my guidance is, start smaller, start with somebody who really gets it and has a strong business case, work with them on that, deliver some real value, chop it up into smaller parts and demonstrate that success to the rest of the business, then move on to some other use cases, be it data migration, be it certification of certain reports. Identifies a series of use cases with some discrete identified business value associated with them, with some stakeholders, and roll it out from there. Yeah, you're never done. You have to continue to govern, continue to catalog the data you have, because your business will change and evolve over time.
Yeah. All right, so now you triggered another thought in my head, Steve. When we're thinking about governance, a lot of it is always typically shared in context of the data and analytics program. Does governance have the opportunity or should be seeking opportunities to influence how the data is being created in the operational world?
I think it has an impact on it because I think you can identify what data you have and whether there are any gaps in that world. And you need to decide whether how the level of governance that you apply to some of that data, depending upon your business, the policies you want to comply with. So it should certainly shape where there might be gaps, might be GDPR or other regulations that are applying, where you would need to apply a little bit more governance than you would do normally. But for me, governance is quite a broad term, because just cataloging what you have, just assigning ownership, just identifying and classifying that data is part of governance. So it doesn't have to be, an army of governance people. It is not a department, really, in my view, but often that there are heads of governance. It's not overweight workflow processes that take years to set up. It is the mere fact that you're cataloging, you're classifying, you're identifying users. You might well be approving components in that as well, because you do want to demonstrate that you've got the workflows in place to approve the right things. But for me, what I've seen is that as long as you're not in a heavily regulated industry, the governance should be lighter weight, because just cataloging projects, looking at all of your data, there's a lot to be done anyway without overdoing it. And there's a byproduct of that. If you do overdo it, you'll find people who will find shortcuts, as you alluded to earlier, and they'll stop using the system that is meant to be their sort of record of where data is, and you won't get the adoption that you expect. Sometimes I've seen projects in the past where the only users of a catalog are those people in the governance department who are paid to do governance. That definitely doesn't drive a data culture, and it definitely doesn't help you with adoption. You need the adoption into the business, to the whole business, to stand a chance of becoming data driven, to stand a chance of building out that data culture. So adoption is key. So usability is really important in that. And the more heavyweight the governance, the more process driven it is, if it's unnecessarily burdensome, will stop people using the tool that you want them to use.
Right. Yeah. It becomes perceived as the innovation prevention committee.
Correct.
Right. Right. Um, you touched a little bit on, the more highly regulated industries are going to have a little bit more, a little larger governance hammer than non-regulated. But even in the non-regulated industries that don't have a lot of thou shalt not do things, there's the thou should do things or not do things. So where I'm getting at is the rising awareness of what I should be doing with the data, even though I could be doing things with the data. In other words, ethics. Does governance help with the ethics elements as well?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, governance is a good thing, because it helps you in that process of classification. So when people come in and try and find the right information, it helps them do that. So, but also from a policy perspective, having a catalog is not only what data do I have, it's should I use this data? And if so, what should I use it for? So that's all part of the policies around privacy, etc. So having a catalog that classifies information and aligning that to policies is really critical in ensuring that you are complying with the appropriate level of governance that you want for that type of data.
Is it fair for me to make this observation that a lot of times governance gets pushed to the side or is not adopted because there's a lack of purpose statement why governance generates value?
I think so. I think a lot of people don't like the word governance, actually, because it's gonna stop people doing what they want to do. So it's often seen as it's certainly not always seen as an enabler. There, for me, it does enable business to making sure it's part of the trustworthiness of the data that you have. But yeah, I think many projects have fallen foul because they're seen as the governance team and the governance project that is perceived as perhaps slowing down or inhibiting some of the innovators in the organization. So I think you do need, that's why it's important to have the right level of governance and for it to be presented as a business enabler in helping the company have high quality, trustworthy data that enables them to make better, faster decisions.
Yeah, I find in many of the companies that I've been involved with, and actually on some of the governance projects I've been involved on, we fell prey and victim to form over function. Right? We had multiple levels of committees. We had all sorts of people that had to take on these new roles in addition to their job, but there was no allocation of capacity to be able to do that. And the thing just falls flat. To your earlier point, years and years go into this, many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in consulting fees have been paid out, and the value prop doesn't even happen. It's a shame, in my opinion.
Exactly. And yes, likewise, in the past, I've seen projects of that nature which have definitely not delivered the anticipated return on investment. They have very, lots of committees, lots of meetings, lots of policies and things like that. And people generally just want to lay their hands on data that will help them do their job better and faster.
Let's go back a little bit, if you will allow me, talking about the data culture in transformation. So do we fund and commission a project to implement our culture and transform our company?
Well, I have worked in companies where that's been the approach, and you the first sign of that are posters in the conference rooms with the core values and how we should behave. But I'm not sure that's the right way to drive culture. For me, culture, be it general culture of any organization or data culture, is led by the executive in the company, starting at the CEO. It's their behaviors that ultimately determine what the culture is of the organization. So to help drive a data culture, then the CEO should be a strong supporter of it. The CEO should demonstrate the right behaviors and make data-driven decisions. Interestingly, a good example of that, we recently secured a new customer in the UK, a retailer called The Very Group. They're a very old catalog business, ironically without a data catalog at the time. And they've transformed into an e-commerce online only business. And while we were in initial discussions with them, I did my research, I checked them out on their website, and they've got a great video of their CFO and CEO talking about the business. And it was quite revealing as they described all of the assets of the business, the new distribution center that they've got, the product range that they've got. But I was quite pleased to see that their CEO described that one of their key strategic assets was the behavioral data of their 4.5 million customers. So not only data, but he was aware enough to know that they had behavioral data of 4.5 million customers, and it was called out as one of their strategic assets to their business. And that's really encouraging, that a CEO gets that data is important, gets that he wants to get the most value from that asset. And I think that sets the tone. That sets the tone for the organization. So data projects that then follow have the support of the executive. So driving culture starts at the very top. You need that executive understanding and commitment to make it happen. and they need to demonstrate, it's not just a one-off. We think data culture is important. This needs to be an active engagement. What are we doing? Where are we investing? What are our strategic data projects? It needs to be an ongoing thing to genuinely have an impact on data culture in an organization.
Yep. I love that it does have to start at the top, and it does need to include all stakeholders, not just shareholders. Right? It's like, what do our customers think is important? Yep. I would love that.
And
So
it's understanding why do it. It's not
yeah.
just a fashionable thing to do.
Hmm.
That maybe there's value to the customers by being data driven, helping customers have better choice, helping their distribution center be more efficient, identifying why the organization should have a data culture and what are the initiatives that the board want to follow, and the projects that they're interested in over the coming years that data underpins. And certainly the most successful customers that I see are the ones who do link data culture to their strategic initiatives that they got in their business. And the beauty of data is it underpins everything today,
Hmm.
whether it's a car manufacturer wanting to transition towards more electric cars, or a cigarette manufacturer wanting to move towards smokeless or nicotineless cigarettes. Whatever the strategic imperatives of the business, you can bet your bottom dollar that there's going to be more data generated, maybe even different relationships and customer relationships established, new products established, all of which require huge volumes of data, or will probably generate huge volumes of data. And so if you can link data initiatives, data projects with those strategic initiatives that are driven top down as part of the data culture, then you stand a much better chance, in my view, of being successful in delivering that data culture that people aspire to.
Thank you for that, because I really believe if I have an analytics program or a governance program or anything related to curating and the data assets that is not tied to that strategic initiative, the objectives of the strategic initiative, and the key results that it expects to achieve, if people can start to see that, it's an easy connection to make. I can enable that key result, and I can show the leading indicators heading towards that key result achievement. But you have to link it together. And that then hopefully will start to get people to buy in. This is a good purpose. Now I understand why governance is important. Right?
Well, you're going to get access to resources. You're going to get access to funding. It's going to get access to the management that you need to sign off on these things. The world becomes a much better place with a strategic initiative that's fully funded, for everybody. And it's important. If it's important, then people want to be part of it. They want to they want to be part of that team and make it a success. It gets the level of visibility that it requires. Barriers are knocked out of the way. And the data, those are the most successful data projects that I know, where they're not tactical, they're not departmental, they're not pilots, they're not skunk works under the radar. They're linked to really important strategic initiatives that any organization might have.
All right. So you're a biking enthusiast.
I
Is that
am.
true? That is a true statement. Okay. Um, and my understanding is, while in one of your most recent journeys, you had your own aha moment around data and governed data. Would you share that with the audience?
Yeah, and I think the topic I've been wrestling with is one we've touched on here, which is how do you build a data culture, and how does something like a data catalog help you with that, and how do you drive adoption of a catalog? And we all know that it's people, process, and technology. So technology alone doesn't normally cut it. You do need the other things that we've discussed, but there are some things that really help. And I did have this aha moment. Like many people at the beginning of lockdown, I dusted down my bike and got out for an hour a day, as we were allowed then, to go cycling. And I wanted to keep track of what I was doing. And whilst I've lived in this area for 20 years, I didn't know many off-road paths. So I started using one that I was familiar with that somebody had told me about. And then I wanted to track things. So somebody told me about Strava. So I subscribed to Strava, and that helped me track what I was doing. If it's not on Strava, it didn't happen. So I'm told. And then I got to the point, well, I'm getting a bit bored now. I've done this path around a nice level gravel path. I've done this many times now. I want to go and explore some other places. So I opened up Strava, and they have a really handy mapping facility. You can plot some routes. And I thought, this is great. This is a map of everything that's out there. But it didn't really cover paths, and I knew the roads because I drive around here. And then I discovered this little toggle to one side in Strava, and it may exist in other applications, I don't know, but it was something called a global heat map, and I just switched it on, and it completely changed everything. This is a consumer app that is capturing and anonymizing and aggregating data about where everybody has been and overlaying it on this route map. And suddenly before my eyes, I could say, well, this is where everybody else is going. And the deeper the color probably meant more people went there. So it's probably more trustworthy. So even within a mile of where I live, I could see tons of new routes that I could use. And that has really impacted my cycling. I started building routes based upon that global heat map of where other people had gone. And so over the last 2 years since I've been doing it, I've really explored the whole of the area around where I live, and now consider myself a bit of an expert, actually. And I related that to the experience of being maybe a data scientist turning up in a new company. Where do they find the data? If they go and look at most data catalogs, it will give them the map, but not a lot else, not a lot of insight into what's there. So it's helpful, but it really doesn't help me get up to speed as quickly as I would like to do. And what Alation does, the features that Alation provides, is it gives you your top data assets, your most popular data assets, a bit like that global heat map. It also provides who are your top users. So instead of going into an empty data catalog that's a bit dull really and doesn't give me a lot of back, from day one, an analyst or a data scientist or any knowledge worker can say, well, hang on a minute, out of all of these assets, be they databases, schemas, tables, columns, whatever, that talk about customer, here are the most popular ones. Well, that's useful. That's really useful. And by the way, here are the top users of those assets as well. That's really useful. So that application of a sort of consumer grade capability to more of an enterprise software makes a big difference. And it helps build a community as well, I think, that, the more people use the data, the more they're contributing to that community of information. It helps people collaborate around it, and it builds this virtuous circle of, well, it's easy to use. And once I get into the application, it's helping me do my job better and faster. I'm then more willing and able to contribute and collaborate around that data, which attracts more people in. So a key challenge in this space, I think, is driving adoption. And having those sort of capabilities, that insight, really help build that virtuous circle to drive adoption. And now my cycling, I'm out much more regularly. I've toured all around the parish and around the villages where I live. And candidly, if somebody now asks me where they should go, I can give them 20 options. I consider myself a bit of a subject matter expert now, from zero to expert. And a lot of that has really been helped by the insight that has given me confidence to trust some of these routes to go out there. So I thought it was quite a eureka moment that was something that's really compelling in any application, candidly. But I think specifically as it relates to large volumes of data, how do you drive adoption of data catalogs or tools like it? You've got to make life easier for people. You've got to make their jobs more enjoyable. And sadly, I think historically, many applications have ended up being used by purely the people whose job it is to use the application, and not by the business population who will get value from it. And that's when you can help. It's not the only way to a data culture, but it makes life a lot easier if you've got an environment that people know that they can go to, that is heavily used, that is universally adopted by business and IT alike. You stand a chance of driving that data culture.
Yeah, gosh, just the pure transparency. And I love the collaborative input from all the information consumers and knowledge workers, good and bad, right? It's like, help me have insight to what is really meaningful and valuable, given the context I'm about to embark on. I love that.
Well, it's just like how we use things like Amazon and other tools that give you reviews. If I went to Amazon and chose a product, I always look for, what people are saying, good and bad. You want to know the good and bad of your data as well. Is this data I can trust? Is there a warning flag there, or are there issues? So having that collaborative consumer grade experience is what people expect, I think.
Yeah, and to me, that's an insight of a data asset actually possibly a data liability. And that should be some kind of trigger that says, hey, let's look into this data set because it is a liability. Maybe we need to decommission it, or it's at the end of its life cycle or something.
Well, and whilst you're doing that, you should at least give some warnings to people not to use it, because there'll be hundreds of people building reports and doing AI, and without that warning, how do they know? And it used to be word of mouth, didn't it? Or you'd be sitting next to John and he would say, "We have a problem with this data. Don't use it, guys." But in this remote world, we haven't got that luxury.
What a beautiful story, Steve, and insightful approach around how to take governance to a level that's a value generating set of disciplines and cultural behaviors. I love that the story, and of course the Alation product really does embody a lot of the visions that you just shared with us, and it allows scale. It enables scale. Incredible. I have had an incredible time talking with you today, sir. Well, I love sharing with great minds like yourself. So thank you for sharing that out with us.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. I love hearing about how it became so real for you. And I definitely know who to ask when I want to hop the pond and do some cycling. You're the go-to.
Only within a 20-mile radius of my house.
That seems manageable to me. That sounds a little bit more manageable than like a whole country. Okay, so this is a great time. If anybody that is in the audience has any questions, you can put them right here into the chat. You could use the Q&A as well. We'll see both of those come through. But in the meanwhile, while we're waiting to see if anybody does have a question, I want to mention two upcoming events that we have. And the first is highly relatable to today's conversation. We are, of course, a proud partner of Alation, and coming up, in July, it's in mid-July, we have the Alation hands-on workshop. So this is your opportunity to do an interactive deep dive demo into this cool technology that we've been talking about today. This is free. It is available to you from anywhere in the world, but if you do so happen to be in the Denver, Colorado area, you can join us in our beautiful co-working space with a rooftop view of the city. Where we will be. We also have another upcoming workshop, which is the Path to a Modern Analytics program. This is an executive level full day session that will review the key areas that you need to focus on to uplevel your company's data and analytics program. That one is also live, and it will be live in outside of Dallas, Texas. If you happen to be in that area, this is at the end of this month. I think we're at June 28th for that one. And then also, of course, always available live and remotely from anywhere. So that's what we've got. So I don't see any questions coming. Oh, I do have a question.
We got one.
From Max. Hey, Max. It says, hi, Mike and Steve. I was wondering what the two of you thought about the next 5 years looking like for the data industry.
Take that first, Steve.
Well, I wonder what the next 5 minutes will look like for the data.
Good answer.
I'm not sure I've got that crystal ball. I certainly see an insatiable appetite for more and more sophisticated analytical and AI tools to be helping improve efficiencies in organizations and deliver world-class experiences for their customers. So it's certainly not going away. Volumes will continue to increase exponentially, I have no doubt. I see the continuing move to the cloud, of course, for all sorts of reasons. And I think the ongoing pandemic, the economic situation will only accelerate that. More and more companies will rely upon the data to make those decisions that they may not have had to make in the past, upon data that they may or may not know that they have. So I think this interesting period that we're going through just accelerates the need for a real focus on data, on governed data, on trusted data in organizations, for the CEOs to make faster, better, more insightful decisions. And I'm going to leave it there because I'm not a technologist, so I don't want to get dragged into any speculation there as to what technology will support all of that.
Yeah, and I'll pile on and reinforce some of the things you said, Steve. Certainly machine learning based analytics is really the new table stakes. However, there's only a few corporations that have realized it. And those corporations, as a function of performance versus their industries, has widened the gap incredibly. Because they had the insight during late 2019 all the way through 2020 and 2021. They made huge investments in getting their data assets under control and then enabling more machine learning based insightful analytics not only for their internal operations, improvement of performance, but also looking for ways of taking data and making it a industry disruption, or certainly differentiation, but more so disrupting industries by embedding insightful analytics, machine learning based analytics into the products and services that are sold to their customers. And you mentioned Airbnb, you mentioned Uber, even Strava, right? These are incredibly value-added things that the end consumer loves. With that is going to come more and more pressure to make sure that the way we use these data assets has to have the proper level of ethics review around it. Right now, it's what we should do. In the near future, is going to be what we must do, because there are policy, there's legislation in the U.S. in particular around that, namely the Algorithmic Accountability Act, which says you have to be able to observe. You can't have a black box anymore. You have to demonstrate your ethical use of the data. The other thing I see is these data sets will truly become encapsulated data assets that are not bound to any one technology, because the technology evolution, which I'm loving, I haven't seen it since my career in this space starting in '96. The technology evolution is leapfrogging every day each other, right? And we have to all start thinking about, how do I decouple the data asset from the enabling technology so I can move my assets around to different technologies. So that's my
Yeah, and I'd add to that. I'd actually look back at a couple of years. I think there was a real change, certainly in the UK, when we start, as a population of 65 million people in the UK, we started getting used to seeing our Prime Minister and the brightest people in the land stand up every evening and show us data and talk about making decisions, important decisions based upon the data, and then would show us graphs that most people hadn't seen since they were at school. So I think that there's an awareness that, governments, companies are making data-driven decisions, and it was brought to everybody's attention over the last couple of years.
Definitely highlighted something, didn't it? Right.
Certainly did.
And the insightful and forward-leaning organizations jumped on it, and they're reaping the rewards now. A good space to be in.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for this great conversation today. Steve, thank you so much for being our guest on the show. We are excited to continue our partnership with Alation. We love you guys. We always have.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Likewise,
Thanks,
Steve.
everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.